stay with me tonight, and it's been 11 months since you touched and looked at me. Don't leave, as I need you to be with me.
I want a divorce. I want to be with the woman I love.
These are the divorce papers. Get your things and move out before I return.
Earlier that evening, Sophie had done something she had not done in almost a year. She had been vulnerable. She hadn't worn anything special. There was no point anymore. She couldn't remember the last time he had really looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. The way a husband looks at his wife. She had stopped trying to catch his eye months ago. It hurt less that way. Tonight, she was going to say the thing she had been swallowing for 11 months. She sat on the edge of their bed, her hands folded tight in her lap, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, rehearsing the words she had been too reluctant, too afraid, too exhausted to say for months. I miss you. I miss us. Please, just look at me again. Just come back to me. The clock ticked. The dinner she'd made sat cooling in the kitchen. And then she heard it, his key in the lock, and every carefully rehearsed word evaporated. Because after everything he had put her through, after everything she had silently endured, her heart still did that thing. That embarrassing, hopeful, devastating thing. He walked in smelling of someone else's perfume. She stood. She looked at him, really looked at him, and she said the words anyway. Stay with me tonight. Her voice cracked on the last word. Please, don't leave. It's been 11 months, James. 11 months since you touched me, since you looked at me like I was yours. I am still your wife. I am still here. He stopped moving. Something crossed his face. Not regret, not love, not even guilt. Irritation. James, please, she stepped toward him. Just tonight. He put his hand on her shoulder, and he pushed her. Not violently, but deliberately. Enough to make her stumble backward towards the bed. Enough to make it unmistakable. I want a divorce, he said. The room went silent. Not the soft silence of a house at night. The brutal, ringing silence of something irreversible. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope she had not seen coming. He dropped it on the floor between them. The paper spilled out slightly, crisp and official, her name printed across the top. She no longer appeals to me. He said it like she wasn't standing right there, like she was a piece of furniture he had outgrown. I want to be with the woman I love, and it is not you. He picked up his keys from the dresser. He didn't look back. The front door closed behind him, and Sophie stood in the wreckage of her own bedroom, staring at her name on a divorce document, listening to the sound of her marriage driving away. She picked up the papers from the floor. She folded them slowly. She put on her coat, walked out of the apartment, and sat down on the front steps in the cold night air, because she could not breathe inside that flat for one more second. And she cried. The kind of crying that has no dignity to it, that strips everything back, that comes from somewhere so deep it doesn't make a sound at first. She cried until her ribs hurt. She cried for the 11 months of empty bed, for every dinner she had cooked that went cold, for every morning she had told herself tomorrow would be different. She didn't hear the car slow down. Excuse me. The voice was deep, calm, the kind of voice that had never needed to raise itself to be heard. She looked up. A black luxury car sat idling at the curb, the kind so understated in its perfection that it made every other car on the street look like it was trying too hard. Standing beside it was a man who made her blink twice. Tall, broad-shouldered, a jaw that could have been carved rather than grown. He wore a deep charcoal suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt open, and he was looking at her with an expression that was not pity. It was something more careful than that, something closer to concern. "I don't usually stop," he said, "but you look like you're carrying something too heavy to carry alone." Sophie almost laughed. That's one way to put it. He didn't move closer, didn't intrude on her space. He simply knelt down so that he was at her eye level and waited. No phone in his hand, no impatience on his face, just stillness. The kind of stillness that says, "I'm not going anywhere." And so she talked. She didn't plan to. She didn't even understand why. Maybe because he was a stranger, and strangers can't judge you. Maybe because she had nothing left to protect. Maybe because sometimes the only person you can be completely honest with is someone who has no history with your pain. She talked the way people do when they have been holding something too heavy for too long, and someone finally, quietly, holds out their hands. She told him everything. The 11 months of silence in a shared bed, the dinners eaten alone, the way he would walk past her like she was furniture, the night he pushed her, the papers on the floor, and the perfume, that other woman's perfume, that she had been smelling on his collar since February, pretending not to notice, because noticing would have made it real. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes. He just listened in the way that very few people actually do, with his whole attention, like nothing in the world was more important than what she was saying. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My name is Ethan Harrington," he said, "and I think you are the most extraordinary woman I have sat on a pavement with in my entire life." She blinked. Then, incredibly, she laughed. It came out wet and broken, but it was real. "I mean it," he said, and there was nothing performative about his expression. "I have an event tonight, a gala, the Architecture and Arts Gala across the city. I was already late, and I was already dreading it." He paused. "I don't want to go alone, and I think you could use a reason to get off these steps." "I'm a mess," Sophie said. "You're a beautiful woman sitting on a pavement because a foolish man didn't know what he had." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come, let me show you what it looks like when someone is actually glad to be seen with you." She stared at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it and waited in the car while she changed. And when she stood in front of her wardrobe, trying to find something, anything, to pull herself together, her eyes went to the garment bag at the very back. Her mother's gown. She had never worn it. It had arrived to her after the funeral wrapped in silk tissue and a note in her mother's handwriting. "For the night you need to remember who you are, my love." It was decades old and worth more than most people would believe. A sweeping crimson masterpiece, hand-beaded, designed by a master who no longer made things for ordinary occasions. Her mother had worn it once, to an event where she had walked in knowing no one, and left knowing everyone. Sophie unzipped the bag. She did her makeup with hands that had stopped shaking. Dark liner, a deep berry lip, her hair pinned up with a few loose pieces falling at her jaw. When she stepped back and looked in the mirror, something shifted behind her own eyes. There she was. Not James's wife. Not the woman who had begged. Not the woman who had been pushed. Her mother's daughter. Herself. The version of herself that had been waiting. Patient and furious and magnificent. Underneath all the grief. She picked up the divorce papers from the dresser, folded them into her clutch, and walked out. The Architecture and Arts Gala was held in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, a venue so extravagant it made chandeliers look modest. Every name in the city's business and creative world was inside, dressed to impress, performing the rituals of power and prestige with practiced ease. Nobody was prepared for what walked through those doors. Ethan Harrington stepped into the entrance hall first, and because he was Ethan Harrington, heads turned immediately. He was, after all, the man whose name was attached to the biggest investment deal the city's architecture sector had seen in a decade. Everyone in that room knew who he was. Everyone in that room wanted 60 seconds of his attention. And then Sophie stepped in beside him. The crimson gown caught the light like it had been made for this room. The beading shimmered with every step. She moved with the particular grace of a woman who had nothing left to pretend and nothing left to fear. Her chin up, her hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm, her eyes scanning the room with a calm that was somehow more devastating than any entrance she could have planned. Ethan leaned down slightly as they walked. "The whole room just stopped breathing," he murmured. "Good," she said. And across the ballroom, past the champagne tables, past the string quartet, past the clusters of architects and patrons and socialites, two people had gone completely, totally still. James saw her first. He had been mid-sentence, one hand on the small of Victoria's back, leaning in to whisper something that was making her laugh. And then something made him look up. Some instinct, some cold current moving through the room. And he saw his wife. His wife, in a gown that looked like it had been designed specifically to end him, on the arm of Ethan Harrington. The sentence died in his throat. The color left his face. Beside him, Victoria followed his gaze, and her smile didn't so much fade as collapse. She had spent months building herself into the most striking woman in James's world. She had told herself, repeatedly, that his wife was unremarkable, manageable, not a threat. She had been catastrophically wrong. James's glass lowered slowly to the table. He couldn't look away. He had been with Sophie for 8 years. 8 years. And he was standing here watching her walk into a room on another man's arm and realizing, with a clarity that felt like being hit by something moving fast, that he had never once seen her look like this. Because she had never looked like this for him. Because he had never given her a reason to. His chest tightened in a way he did not have a name for. Not jealousy. Something worse. Recognition. The specific, sickening recognition of a man who has thrown away something irreplaceable and is only now, too late, beginning to understand what it was worth. "Is that your wife?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping to something she couldn't quite keep steady. "Don't say it," James said, like a man who already knew what was coming and couldn't bear to hear it spoken out loud. Ethan, for his part, was not performing. That was what made it so striking to everyone watching. He did not parade Sophie around the room. He did not use her as a prop. He stayed close to her, attentive, genuinely attentive. And when the room's most prominent foundation chair, a formidable woman named Mrs. Caldwell, approached them and began asking Sophie about her literacy program. Roots and pages, Ethan stepped back and let Sophie speak. Let her shine. Watched her with the expression of a man who already knew the answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. At one point, he brought her a glass of sparkling water without being asked, because he had noticed her hand was empty and she hadn't wanted to break her conversation to find a waiter. "You didn't have to do that," she said, when Mrs. Caldwell moved away. "I know," he said simply. She looked at him. "Why are you being this kind to me?" "Because in 37 years of living, I have walked into 100 rooms, and I have never seen a woman sitting on a pavement in the dark who made me want to know everything about her. I think—" He paused, something careful in his eyes. "I think I was late to this event for a reason." Sophie's heart did something complicated. She looked away first. James found her alone near the terrace doors 20 minutes later. He had been drinking more than he should. His tie was loosened. He looked, Sophie thought, like a man whose carefully constructed evening was falling apart around him. "Sophie." He said her name the way a man says something he knows he has no right to say anymore. Quietly, almost carefully, like he was testing whether she would even respond to it. She turned slowly, and the look on her face stopped him cold, because it wasn't anger. Anger would have been easier. Anger meant she still cared enough to fight. What she gave him instead was something far worse. Something still and clear and completely unreachable. The look of a woman who has already done her grieving and come out the other side. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "You look like someone I don't deserve to be standing in front of." "Funny," she said. "You had plenty of words earlier tonight." His jaw tightened. A muscle flickered. He was a man used to controlling rooms, and he had no control left. "You dropped divorce papers on our bedroom floor, James. You told me I no longer appealed to you. You pushed me." Her voice was steady. "Those were your words. Own them." He looked at the floor. When he looked back up, his eyes were wet, and there was something in them she had not seen in longer than she could remember. Regret. Real regret. The kind that comes too late and knows it. "If I had seen what was right in front of me," his voice broke at the edges. "Sophie, you are the biggest mistake I ever made. I chased women my whole life because it was a weakness. My weakness. And I had the most beautiful woman alive in my own home, and I threw you away like you meant nothing." He pressed his hand over his mouth for a moment. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what I did to you." "I know you are," she said, "but sorry doesn't unring a bell." She reached into her clutch. She drew out the folded divorce papers, the ones he had thrown at her feet less than 2 hours ago, and she placed them on the table between them, neatly, deliberately. "I'm signing these," she said, "tonight." She took the pen from his breast pocket. She signed her name on the line, slowly, clearly, with the steady hand of a woman who had already done her grieving on a pavement in the cold. She slid the papers back to him. He stared at them. His hand was shaking. It was at this moment that Ethan appeared at her side. And James's face changed again, because James, as head of his architecture firm, knew exactly who Ethan Harrington was. He had been preparing for months for tomorrow's meeting. The one where Ethan's holding company was set to sign the biggest investment deal his firm had ever secured. $40 million. A deal that would define the next decade of his career. Ethan looked at James with the measured calm of a man who held every card in the deck and had no need to show them. "Mr. James Whitfield," he said, "I believe we have a meeting tomorrow morning." James straightened. "We do, yes. I had no idea you knew my wife." "Your wife," Ethan said, not unkindly, but precisely. "Yes, Sophie and I met this evening." He glanced at her, and something warm moved across his expression before he looked back at James. "I should also mention that my legal team finalized an addendum to tomorrow's contract this afternoon. One of the new clauses requires that the lead partner on any project funded by Harrington Capital maintains a demonstrable standard of personal integrity. A clause my lawyers added after our last investment was compromised by a partner's private conduct. After what I have personally witnessed tonight," he paused, his gaze steady, "I am afraid the deal is cancelled. The clause has been triggered, Mr. Whitfield." The color drained from James's face completely. "I understand, but we can discuss the terms tomorrow." "There is nothing left to discuss," Ethan said, his voice quiet but final. "My solicitors will send formal notice in the morning." James stood very still, the signed divorce papers in one hand, £40 million of his professional future dissolving in the other. And then Victoria was there. She had heard everything. Her champagne flute hung loosely from her fingers. Her face, which had been so carefully composed all evening, had come entirely undone. "James," her voice was thin, sharp. "The deal is cancelled?" "Victoria, I can explain." She laughed. It was not a kind sound. "Do you know something?" she said, and her voice had dropped to something low and controlled and cutting. "I have never loved you, not once, not for a single day." James stared at her. "I was with you because of what you had, the firm, the money, the lifestyle." She set her glass down on the table with a quiet click. "And now look at you." She picked up her clutch. "You have nothing left that I came for, James. And I am not the kind of woman who stays for nothing." She looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with guilt, just a cool, empty finality. "I never loved you. I want you to know that before I go." And she walked away without looking back. James stood alone, holding a divorce document in one hand, the rubble of his career in the other, understanding, at last, the full weight of the reckoning he had brought entirely upon himself. There is a word people reach for in moments like this, but justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it is simply the quiet collapse of everything a man built on the wrong foundations. Every consequence returning, at last, to its rightful door. Ethan turned back to Sophie, and his expression softened entirely. "Shall we?" She took his arm, and they walked away from James Whitfield, who stood holding signed divorce papers in one hand and the ruins of his professional future in the other, without looking back once. Later, when the gala had softened into its final hour and the ballroom had thinned to its most important guests, Ethan found Sophie on the terrace. She was looking out at the city lights, her wrap around her shoulders, the night air cool against her face. She looked, he thought, like a woman coming back to herself in real time. "How are you?" he asked. Lighter, she said, and meant it. He stood beside her. They were quiet for a moment, the comfortable quiet of people who have somehow already said the most important things. I meant what I said earlier, he said, about being late for a reason. She turned to look at him, and something in his expression shifted, like a man who had been waiting a long time to say something and had finally found the right moment. Can I tell you something? He said. Something I have never told anyone? She looked at him. I bought that ring 4 years ago, not for anyone specific. I didn't even know her yet. I just walked past a jeweler's window one afternoon and something stopped me. And I thought, he paused, almost embarrassed by it. I thought, whoever she is, she will not need it to shout. She will just need it to be real. He exhaled quietly. I have carried it ever since, waiting, not knowing what I was waiting for. He looked at her. Until tonight. He reached into his jacket pocket. Sophie's breath stopped. The ring was simple and extraordinary at once. A single deep-set stone, clean and brilliant, the kind of thing chosen by someone who understood that real elegance never shouts. I know this is fast, he said. I know tonight has been extraordinary in ways that would make anyone's head spin. I know you are a woman who needs no one to rescue her. And I want to be very clear that is not what this is. He paused, his eyes steady on hers. But I have never in my life met a woman like you. And I am not in the habit of letting things that matter slip through my hands because the timing was inconvenient. I am not asking you to rush, he said quietly. I am not asking you to decide anything tonight except this. Will you let me spend the time it takes to become the man who deserves you? Will you give me the chance to show you what it looks like when someone sees you clearly and chooses you, completely and on purpose? The terrace was still. The city hummed below them. Sophie looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought of the pavement in the cold. She thought of her mother's note tucked inside that garment bag. For the night, you need to remember who you are, my love. She remembered. Yes, she said. He slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and in full view of the terrace windows, where James Whitfield stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes, the signed divorce papers still clutched in his shaking hand. Ethan cupped Sophie's face in his hands and kissed her. It was not a performance. It was a beginning. And on the other side of the glass, James Whitfield watched the woman he had thrown away become someone else's whole world, and wept in a way he had not wept since he was a boy. Not for her. It was too late for that. He wept for himself, for the version of his life that had just, in full view of everyone he knew, closed its doors permanently. Beside him, there was no one. Victoria was gone. 18 months later. Sophie Elizabeth Harrington stood at the altar of a sunlit country chapel in the English countryside, ivory lace at her wrists, her mother's favorite white roses threaded through her hair, and watched Ethan walk toward her with the expression of a man who had been certain of this moment since a cold pavement in the dark. They were married on a Saturday in April, when the light came through the chapel windows like something out of a painting, and every person in that room felt it. The particular joy of two people who had found each other not in spite of a hard night, but because of it. The following spring, Sophie gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, Noah, full of promise and new beginnings, and Naomi, for Sophie's mother, whose note still lived folded in Sophie's jewelry box. For the night, you need to remember who you are, my love. Ethan sat in the hospital room, holding one in each arm, with the expression of a man who could not believe his own luck. And then Sophie looked at him from the bed, tired and radiant, and more herself than she had ever been. And he understood that luck had nothing to do with it. They had chosen each other, on purpose, completely. As for James Whitfield, the firm did not survive the collapsed deal. 40 million was the cornerstone. Without it, the structure came down in pieces. Clients followed the confidence, and the confidence had left the room the night James stood holding divorce papers and watching his wife walk away. He sold the apartment, then the car, then the things he had bought to fill the space that a good marriage would have occupied. Victoria did not return. He lived alone in a modest flat on the eastern side of the city, a shadow of the man he had believed himself to be. Not broken beyond repair, perhaps, but emptied, quieted by the particular weight of a man who had everything and chose to throw it away for nothing of lasting value. Occasionally, he would see Sophie's name in the press, attached to Ethan's, to the Harrington Foundation, to the Roots and Pages centers that now stretched across the country. He would look at the photographs. Sophie laughing, Sophie speaking, Sophie holding her children with Ethan's arm around her shoulders. Both of them looking at each other the way James had never once looked at her. And he would understand, freshly, every single time, that the life he had is precisely the life he built. 3 months after the wedding, Sophie stood at the front of a new Roots and Pages center, the first of 6 that the Harrington Foundation was funding across the country. Children filled the seats. Teachers she had trained stood at the front of classrooms that smelled like fresh paint and new books. Mrs. Caldwell was there. Her best friend Claire was there, laughing loudly at something and making no apology for it. Ethan stood at the back of the room, watching her speak, with the expression of a man who knows, with complete certainty, that he is exactly where he is supposed to be. Sophie caught his eye from the podium. He smiled. She smiled back. The real kind, the deep kind, the kind that her face had been saving up for a very long time. She thought, fleetingly, of a pavement in the cold, of divorce papers on a bedroom floor, of a push she hadn't seen coming, walking into a room and changing the entire story. She had not planned any of it, but she had been ready for all of it. She just hadn't known it yet. And that, she understood now, was the whole point. If you enjoyed this love story, please like, comment, and subscribe to see more heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue creating the stories that make your heart race.